Wonderful. Welcome everyone and thank you for joining us at the Keats Shelley House. I'm really delighted this evening to welcome Paul Roberts. Paul is a concert pianist, lecturer and writer. He's a specialist in Debussy and in Liszt, and in fact his work on Debussy has become the seminal text in the English language. As well as that, Paul is currently the new series editor for a Bloomsbury publication, Short Guides for Pianists, and he's writing the first of those as well as editing it, on a short guide to Impressionism, which will be published this year. And finally, he gives lecture recitals such as this one all over the world, and is the artistic director for the summer school at music at Château d'Aix in France, which sounds absolutely wonderful. And this evening we're delighted to have Paul here for a talk at the piano or a lecture recital on Keats, John Keats and Debussy. So over to Paul, thank you.
Thank you, Ella, thank you. I'm thrilled to be here, as anyone would be, I think. I think it's very moving to be actually doing something where the great man died, where he was. Fascinating. My whole career has been, or my interests, and sometimes my career when I get employed, my interests have always been in finding commonalities between different art forms. So my first book, which Ella kindly mentioned, was about Debussy and Impressionist painting, which is an obvious enough connection. And my most recent book, which I'm about to publish, I've returned to that subject after nearly 30 years, having left it alone, and I'm writing another book on Impressionism, Debussy and Ravel. So I'm slightly here under false pretenses because you are going to be also hearing some music of Ravel, which has got almost nothing to do with John Keats, except with one word. It was a word that Ravel didn't mention. Of course, the famous word for John Keats is nightingale, isn't it? So the piece that I'm going to play to you is called Oiseaux Tristes, Sad Birds, and thereby hangs a tale. So I will probably wrap up the afternoon telling you about that. So diverting myself from my great hero, Claude Debussy. I've done a lot on Debussy. I've played almost the entirety of his piano music. I've written extensively about him. I've lived with him since I was probably a 13 or 14-year-old boy, and I played this little piece. Which is La Fille aux Cheveux de Lin, the girl with the flaxen hair. And I was overcome with it. I can remember as a boy first discovering music, I think, with that piece. I had some very fine, luckily enough, very fine, very uncelebrated teachers. And with that piece, I learnt about musical phrasing. I learnt about musical movement, musical shape. And it is still one of the pieces that's dear to my heart. But why I have started like this is that I have never done any work on Keats and Debussy. This is a new venture for me. It has always been in the back of my mind. There are two very important touchstones in Debussy's life where Keats is mentioned. That is all. Right at the beginning of his life, in 1889, when he was 20, nearly 30 years old, and towards the end of his life. So this lecture is going to frame those two moments which I will tell you about. Debussy I was going to say knew nothing of Keats at this time. When he first came to Rome, Debussy was up the hill at the Villa Medici. He was a student for 3 years. He hated it, or he purported to hate it. He was not very old. I blush to tell you how old he was. He was really not much more than 20 or 21, and he was having an affair with a woman who was old enough to be his mother. She was a singer in Paris. She was married. She was 30 years old and he was 18. And so his misery here at the Villa Medici was because he missed her. And he was always escaping and going back to Paris. Quite extraordinary. We know very little of his life around that time. It's very strange and mysterious. But he flitted back and forth. And he said, and it's almost blasphemy to say this in this great city, isn't it? He said, oh, where does he say it? I've had enough of the eternal city. I want to see some Manet and hear some Offenbach. That's in Debussyiana, in Debussy's scholarship, that's a very famous quotation. What is not quite so famous, and I've only myself come across this recently, reading a wonderful book in French called Harmonie en bleu et or, Harmony in Blue and Gold, which relates Debussy's relationship to painting and all the paintings that he knew and all the painters that he knew and that he rubbed shoulders with. From Rome, up the hill, he wrote to his very esteemed and venerable piano teacher back at the Paris Conservatoire, called Antoine Marmontel. Marmontel knew Chopin. Get that. He was a very old man. Debussy at the Paris Conservatoire around the 1880s was having lessons with someone who not only had lessons from Chopin, but knew Chopin. So it becomes quite understandable that Debussy's music is imbued with the spirit of Chopin. So he's writing to his old teacher about the paintings in the Sistine Chapel. So this is more blasphemy, I'm afraid, in the Eternal City. He says, I couldn't live with them. They're not for me, he says. He says, I feel small in front of them. And the implication of this letter to his teacher is that they're past. They no longer speak to what he wanted to be. He was a young man, barely aware of his genius, but with a pride enough to know that he had something special. And he says, I bow down, yes, before these masterpieces, but I believe we can only derive visual impressions from them, not impressions of the soul. Now, ain't that interesting? These great religious paintings, and they don't speak to his soul. They don't speak to what he, as a young man, the food that he wanted to nurture his art. They were, frankly, too old, too of the past. One can't blame him, absolutely can't blame him. Very interesting. We can only derive visual impressions from them. I think just the display, oh wow, it is the oh wow factor, isn't it, on the ceiling. But not speaking in terms of meaning. Religious, no. I mean, Debussy was an atheist anyway. But even aesthetically, they didn't quite make it for him. Now then, this brings me to another young man who wasn't in Rome. He was in Devon at the time, John Keats. He was travelling in Devon, and he was writing Endymion, that interminably too long poem, wonderful in parts, and again, rather like the paintings in the Sistine Chapel, we don't quite relate to that mythological, long, epic poetry anymore. But I'm going to read you some, because the opening, as you all know, and it's even on my beer mat, a thing of beauty is a joy forever. It is so gorgeous. But let me, I think, have I got this on my phone? I think I will read more of the letter than yes. I hope I've got it on my phone. Yeah. This is the preface to Endymion. So I'm comparing two young men. John Keats in Devon, young man, younger than Debussy was when he was here. But Keats was so much more mature at 20 and 21 and 23 and 25 than Debussy was at nearly 30. Knowing within myself the manner in which this poem has been produced, it is not without a feeling of regret that I make it public. What manner I mean will be quite clear to the reader, who must soon perceive great inexperience, immaturity, and every error denoting a feverish attempt rather than a deed accomplished. So he's very reticent about what he's about to do, or about what he's done in publishing it. Then he says this, and I think of Debussy up at the Villa Medici. The imagination of a boy is healthy, and the mature imagination of a man is healthy. But there is a space of life in between, in which the soul is in a ferment, the character undecided, the way of life uncertain, the ambition thick-sighted. When I started thinking seriously about this subject, as I said, I had a premonition for a long time, because of the two points at the beginning and end of his life, which I'm going to tell you about, that there was some kind of connection between Keats and Debussy. The connection begins, first of all, in me, because, and this is not in retrospect, I know that the first music that ever really spoke to me, unlike the paintings of the Sistine Chapel, the first music was the music of Debussy. And the first poetry was the poetry of John Keats. I put that back in my brain, I put it to one side, and then I hang on to that throughout my whole life up till now. I hang on to those two poles of poetry and music. And my premonition, maybe no more than simply a taste, what I liked, but I think it's more than that, and I think I've proved it so. My premonition has been proved correct. And we only have to look at them, step back a little bit, even if we know very little about Keats or very little about Debussy. What we will know about Keats is the Ode to the Nightingale, the Ode to Autumn. What we will know about Debussy is La Mer, the sea. And immediately we see in those two works, but there's much more to it than just those two, that both were pantheists. They both received their nourishment for their art, their inspiration from nature. And that's been staring me in the face for many, many decades without me ever having actually dealt with it until I was asked to do something here. And I thought, I'm going to deal with that. Keats. What do I know about Keats? Oh my goodness, yes. I was going to do Keats and Liszt, which is quite a little bit more difficult. But Liszt lived here too, and Byron. Liszt and Byron fit, so maybe I didn't need to do Keats, I could do Byron. But no, I thought, no, let's look at Keats and Debussy. Debussy said, blow, I've ruined it. I didn't want to tell you that Debussy said it. Who said this? Everything which can be perceived by a fine ear in the rhythm of the surrounding world can be represented poetically. That's wrong. Debussy didn't say that, but that's what I was going to read out, because I want you to think that Keats said that. Debussy actually said can be represented musically. But they are so close, because Keats himself says this at the beginning or somewhere on the first book of Endymion. Nor do we merely feel these essences. What are these essences? They are everything can be perceived by a fine ear in the rhythm of the surrounding world. Nor do we merely feel these essences for one short hour. No, even as the trees that whisper round a temple become soon dear as the temple's self, so does the moon, the passion poesy, glories infinitely. They were so attuned, as any of you will know, just by reading the sonnets. Not the sonnets, the odes. They were so attuned to the sounds of nature, to the rhythms of nature, and somehow to the sort of holistic meaning of nature that combined with their senses and gave birth to their art. In one case poetry, in the other case music. And Keats' poetry is replete with music, of which I'll demonstrate. And Debussy's music is replete with poetry. And in that case, we probably have to slightly alter the meaning of the term poetry and say it is poetic. It reaches places when we listen to it. It touches us in ways that poetry does. Right, so let us put some history onto this, what is largely speculation at the moment, just a feeling between music and poetry. When Debussy returned to Paris after his sojourn here, hating the Eternal City, and he met Liszt actually. Liszt was a very, very old man, and Liszt made the climb up to the Medici, and they hired 2 pianos, and Debussy and another student played to Liszt. Extraordinary. I love the way that history connects like that so quickly. We're right into the 20th century with Debussy, and we're right back at the beginning of the 19th with Liszt. When he returned to Paris, he became a sort of a signed-up member of symbolist circles, bohemian poets and painters, not many musicians, a shadowy existence, talking about poetry, the philosophy of poetry. And he attended, I'm trying to find the actual bit, which I can't find. He attended a lecture by one, and I've Google this guy. There's nothing about him. He attended a lecture by somebody called Henri Mercier. Now, Mercier, we know, but there's nothing about him anywhere. It's only scholars grubbing around in rooms in Paris that have discovered that Mercier did a translation of Keats. It was never published, but he put on a series of talks. And Debussy's friend, Robert Godet, very, very important man in his life, one of his closest friends with whom he communed philosophically about the meaning of music and art and painting and poetry. Godet writes to Debussy in 1889 and says that he has been to a wonderful reading of a translation of Endymion. And he says, it is very beautiful. That's all. That's all we have. No response from Debussy, except we do know, yes, we don't know it from Debussy, but we know from another friend who had been to these lectures and said he had been to them with Debussy. Then at the end of his life, the same friend, in 1916, writes this. Now remember, to Debussy, now remember this is the First World War. Absolutely terrible feeling among artists and everyone of the desolation and the horror of what they were going through. And he says, Godet says to Debussy, you've been silent for a long time. Debussy, by the way, was very ill at this time. He was dying, in fact, from a pretty horrible disease. You've been silent for a long time, but your silence is of such quality that I scrupled about breaking it without a plausible reason. If only there were in this dreary world, where we stretch out fruitless furrows, something to discover whose story might distract you. But no, nothing, less than nothing. Everything that lives and dies, indeed, comes from elsewhere. And then he moves on into a more optimistic frame, and he says to him, I thought of you the other day. I wanted to send you a book. And it was a book by a translation of Walter Pater, great late 19th century critic of the famous book Renaissance, but also a great philosopher of music and a philosopher of painting. And Pater said, one of the most famous aphorisms in the history of art in the 19th century, all art aspires to the condition of music. Now, Godet doesn't quote that, but it's absolutely fascinating because it's definitely in his mind. As you read the letter, you can see that he's thinking of Pater because he's just mentioned him, and then he's also thinking of all art aspires to the condition of music, because he says, what he doesn't say is almost always as precious as what he does say, and fits in very musically, or rather it emanates from it. One thinks of that ode from Keats on a Grecian urn. I've got there. See, you were wondering when I would ever get there. Which is implicitly dedicated to you. And then he goes full circle back to 1889. Do you remember the name? Henri Mercier, he says. Did the late poor Mercier suspect this? I'll read it again. I thought the other day of a book that I wanted to send to you, a translation of Walter Pater. What he doesn't say is almost always as precious as what he does say, and fits in very musically, or rather it emanates from it. We need to unpack that perhaps. One thinks of that ode from Keats on the Greek urn, which is implicitly dedicated to you. Did the late poor Messier suspect this? There is so much there that rings and reverberates in things that are not said. And if you've remembered the title of my lecture, if you ever knew it, heard melodies are sweet. And those Keatsians among you will know the next line, but those unheard are sweeter. What he doesn't say, Pater, is almost as precious as what he does say, and fits in very musically, or rather emanates from it. It emanates from the silence. What he doesn't say, something comes out of the silence, something to be said. The point at which art is born is what he's talking about. One thinks of the ode from Keats on the Greek urn, which is implicitly dedicated to you, meaning your music is like this, isn't it? That's what you do, don't you? And then he's wondering, 30 years back, he wondered if Messier suspected right back at that time that Debussy might have been a Keatsian. But I don't think Messier knew Debussy at all. I think he just attended a lecture like you have attended mine. So when Debussy got back from Rome, he wrote his first Keatsian work of art, in the sense that it was a very young work. It was not his greatest work. It was something that he hesitated to publish. I don't think he was quite as modest as Keats, but Keats' modesty was probably put on anyway. And he wrote the first piano pieces that he ever wrote. They're called the two arabesques. And I'm going to play you the first arabesque. And then I'm going to relate it speculatively to Endymion. I thought what a lovely chance it would be to do this and to read you some poetry. I really love reading poetry. Whether people like hearing me read it is another matter, but I'm going to read you that most beautiful opening from Endymion, which among Keatsians is so famous, and it is so perfect, as that piece is so perfect. Music of idealism, music of youth, music of utter naturalness, as this poem is. They were similar, but I think Keats had it even more than Debussy, in that when they had an idea, they just wrote it down. Those of you who know Ode to a Nightingale will know that he wrote it in 3 hours, sitting under a tree on Hampstead Heath or in his garden. Probably less than 3 hours. And it reads like that. It reads as if it's all in the moment as he writes it. It's all planned somewhere, but it all... And that is exactly what I want to show you with the arabesque. A thing of beauty is a joy forever. Its loveliness increases. It will never pass into nothingness, but still will keep a bower quiet for us, and a sleep full of sweet dreams and health and quiet breathing. Therefore, on every morrow are we wreathing a flowery band to bind us to the earth, spite of despondence, of the inhuman dearth of noble natures, of the gloomy days, of all the unhealthy and darkened ways made for our searching. Yes, in spite of all, some shape of beauty moves away the pall from our dark spirits. And such are daffodils with the green world they live in, and clear rills that for themselves a cooling covert make 'gainst the hot season. The mid-forest brake, rich with a sprinkling of fair musk rose blooms. And much and such, too, is the grandeur of the dooms we have imagined for the mighty dead, all lovely tales that we have heard or read. An endless fountain of immortal drink pouring us unto us from the heavens' brink. That's where I slightly balk, and the last rhyme of that opening stanza. And that was probably why I made an error, because I saw it coming. An endless fountain of immortal drink pouring unto us from the heavens' brink. I don't think that is quite of the class of what we've just had. And then it goes on, that bit that I read you. Nor do we merely feel these essences for one short hour. No, even as the trees that whisper round a temple become soon dear as the temple's self, so does the moon, the passion poesy, glories infinite, haunt us. And we're getting onto the moon, aren't we? So I will play you Clair de Lune. So it's in one way, Debussy's Clair de Lune, in one way this is easy, but it's a cop-out if I really make it easy, is that all I have to do is play a piece of music and read a piece of poetry, and they've got the same images in them, and so you say, therefore, Debussy is like Keats. Yes, I am saying that, but I hope I'm saying far more than that. But that's the easy bit to do. Let me then just take you through one of the essences there, and we could demonstrate this anywhere really. In fact, I think I might I might demonstrate it better, because clearly there is no connection between Endymion and Debussy's arabesque. I'm not making that. What I'm saying is that there is a connection of ease and artistic simplicity and beauty and music. There's a musicality in the verse which overrides the meaning of the verse. And 3 years, 2 years, only 2 years later, he perfected what he does so beautifully in Endymion in his odes. And I think actually one verse from the Ode to a Nightingale is slightly better, because it's iambic pentameter, which is 5 beats to a line, whereas Endymion is 4 beats to a line. A thing of beauty is a joy forever. Its loveliness increases. It will never pass into nothingness, but still will keep a bower quite quiet for us and asleep. I can use Endymion just as well. It's fascinating. What I want to say, and how this speaks and is crafted as music is, I mentioned the term natural. There is absolutely, except possibly the last drink and brink, there is absolutely no forcing of the words into the rhythm or into the rhyme. He has found words that, through their utter naturalness, through the way we speak them, indeed, create the poem, create the music of the poem. And you can hear that and demonstrate it so clearly by just pointing out the beat. And the beat is always absolutely right. You can see it coming. It's never completely regular. A thing of beauty is a joy forever. A thing of beauty is a joy forever. That's how we say it. We don't say it any other way. Its loveliness increases. And then there's a pause there, because he wants you to think about what he's just said. And those words, a thing of beauty is a joy forever, are almost monosyllabic. These words are quite complex. Its loveliness, it's got 3 syllables. Increases, it's got 3 syllables. But it's so obviously, its loveliness increases. We get that beautiful cadence, that shape. A thing of beauty is a joy forever. Its loveliness increases. It will never, for the rhyme is perfect, because then you go on. You don't sit on the rhyme. It will never pass into nothingness, but still will keep a bower quiet for us, and a sleep full of sweet dreams and health and quiet breathing. That line is so long. It goes right to the edge of the page, and yet it's still only got 4 beats. Full of sweet dreams and health and quiet breathing. Quiet breathing? No. Full of sweet dreams and health and quiet breathing. It sort of bounds, doesn't it? And what he's talking about is what the rhythm of the words are doing. The words are bounding. The words are making you take your breath in and express it outwards as if you have a kind of feeling of joy. Okay, I will give you the verse in Ode to a Nightingale. But before I do it, I will show you how Debussy does that in the arabesque. This is incredibly approachable, definable music. Why it's so popular, this piece, is because of that. It doesn't challenge us too much. We know where we are. as we know where we are here. A thing of beauty is a joy forever. You immediately sit up and you agree. And you agree with this. What he's actually done is this. He's written 5 absolutely gorgeous chords, and then he's arpeggiated them. And full text. And this constant, what we call triplet rhythm, diddy, diddy, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And the bass line goes down. That is Keats's stanza. That is his structure. That is his 4 beats in a bar, 4 beats in a line, or his iambic pentameter. So, yeah. And then this is absolutely conventional cadence in classical music. You've got, you cadence into your key. You hold up the music with expectation, and then you relax it. It's like rhyming. Then here comes the masterstroke of the whole piece. Beautiful what you've just heard, but this it's called a pentatonic scale, so it's made up of 5 notes against a very conventional left-hand accompaniment. Like an accompanying lutenist or guitarist. So let's do it. Has a descant at the top. And then a complete change of colour and key. And rhyming is so important in this style of music. This could be an ode, a poetic ode. The rhyming, which really in music is a kind of repetitive idea. So you hear it once, you hear it twice, you hear it 3 times, and you hear it at different pitches. So you have and it's the way he builds it so effortlessly, so simply with his material. One final thing I want to say is that great poets, great musicians, they use these structures, which are the form in which they decide to write their piece, so iambic pentameter, or a blank verse. I don't quite know what you'd call this, but and they vary it. They give it very unexpected twists. You believe, as you listen to this piece, we don't judge it really, but we just listen to it. And we hear a collection of two-bar phrases, what's called two-bar phrases. Da, two, one, two, one, two, one, two. But in fact, Debussy, unbeknown, we don't quite know how he does it. He pops in a 3 every now and again. So you don't have a two-bar phrase, you have a 3-bar phrase. I'll count it for you and you will see. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 2, sorry, 3. And I've looked at that, and as I just think, how's he done that? What we're expecting is we're expecting that. That would be the logic of the two. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. But no, he extends it. And it is by tiny little details like that that the poet and the musician somehow are working on the same ground. And this will lead me into another beautiful piece by Debussy, from Ode to a Nightingale. I cannot see what flowers are at my feet, nor what soft incense hangs upon the boughs. But in embalmed darkness, guess each sweet wherewith the seasonable month endows the grass, the thicket, and the fruit tree wild. White hawthorn and the pastoral eglantine, fast fading violets covered up in leaves, and mid-May's eldest child, the coming musk rose, full of dewy wine, the murmurous haunt of flies on summer eves. It is stupendous because the rhyming you barely notice it. The rhyming is just so natural. There's this mellifluous patter underneath, like the wind, like what he's writing about. Again, the image that he has in his mind becomes the words on the page. He's not only describing it, he's actually being it. That is the art of great poetry. And very interestingly in music, music actually doesn't mean anything. So you bypass Keats' semantic meaning. Music doesn't need what he has. He is talking about a beautiful evening with eglantine and musk roses and the sound of nature around him. And he's putting that into words which then embody that. Debussy doesn't even have to do that. He doesn't have that semantic meaning. He has the pure music. And I say this very deliberately because this was one of the big debates, philosophical debates, at the end of the 19th century about the nature and meaning of music. About the parallels between music and words, and that the artists, the painters too, and the poets believed that music had it made. All art aspires to the condition of music. There we are. Yeah, that is Walter Pater's great aphorism. And it was embodied in all the debate at the end of the 19th century. I cannot see, 5, I cannot see what flowers are at my feet, nor what soft incense hangs upon the boughs. but in embalmed darkness guess each sweet, wherewith the seasonable month endows, wherewith, boom, boom, the seasonable month endows, the grass, the thicket, and the fruit tree wild, white hawthorn and the pastoral eglantine, fast fading violets covered up in leaves, fast fading violets, even the actual onomatopoeic sound of the words, and mid-May's eldest child, the coming musk rose, full of dewy wine, the murmurous haunt of flies on summer eves. If you can't hear those murmurous flies, it's quite extraordinary. The murmurous haunt of flies on summer eves. This is a prelude by Debussy. Soft incense hangs upon the boughs, the grass, the thicket, the fruit tree wild, hawthorn and pastoral eglantine. This is called the bruyère, which in French means heather. This is heather, heathland, heather. It also has an aura of the sea about it. This is en plein air music. This is a painting out of doors. This is way ahead of the arabesque, exactly in the same way as Ode to a Nightingale is way ahead of Endymion. Thank you. So, before we return to our nightingale and move on, I have a recording of a nightingale which I'd like to play you, which I'm dying to play you actually. But I want to just return to the title of my lecture, which is Heard Melodies Are Sweet, but Those Unheard Are Sweeter. And let me read you that part of Grecian Urn. I think, to me, the Grecian Urn, and I think to Debussy's friend, Robert Godet, is central to the kind of art that Debussy was making. It's art which is fundamentally paradoxical. He's making music out of silence. Music that comes from silence and returns to silence, and within its sounds expresses the experience of silence. There are many, many pieces by Debussy that does that, particularly the piano music. By no means all. Debussy wrote completely different music too. But one of the special things he did that no one else did was this particular exploration of silence. And why the urn is so relevant to that is that the urn is absolutely built on paradox. Is that what Keats does is that, right towards the end, in a wonderful meta way that we would say today, that he recognises that he's being a poet and that it's all his fancy, and oh, come on, perhaps it's not what it seems. And he says, yes, he almost curses the urn, doesn't he? Oh, Attic shape, fair attitude, with breed of marble men and maidens overwrought, cold pastoral, he said. He turns his back on what he has just done in the previous stanzas, which is all about bringing stasis, not bringing stasis to life, seeing life in immobility. It's the essence of sculpture, isn't it, really? A statue which breathes, like in The Winter's Tale, when Hermione is brought back to life, and she is actually a complete statue. And everyone thinks she's a statue, and then she gets off her pedestal. And in the theatre, in a great, great performance, it just brings tears to your eyes, because it's the sort of the essence of life after death. And in the Grecian Urn, Keats makes up this story about all these lovely people. They're the beautiful people, aren't they? On the side of the urn. They're dancing. They're making love. They're playing music. The trees can't shed their leaves. Are happy, happy boughs that cannot shed your leaves, nor ever bid the spring adieu. They're spring leaves, and there they are. They're caught. They're frozen in time. And he says, great, you're going to be that forever. You'll live like that. And happy, happy melodist, unwearied, forever piping, forever new. There he is, and he's stuck, completely immobile. And Keats says, wonderful, your song will go on forever because nothing will change and you're doing exactly what you were doing when you were painted. And then people, more happy love, more happy, happy love, forever warm and still to be enjoyed, forever panting and forever young. They're just about to embrace all breathing human passion far above. You're way above what we're doing. We're all passionate and breathing, and in our world that leaves a heart high sorrowful and cloyed, a burning forehead and a parching tongue. You're not that. You've escaped all that. But before that, heard melodies are sweet. What you've just heard. But those unheard on the vase, they're making music. But those unheard are sweeter. Therefore, ye soft pipes, play on. Not to the sensual ear, we can't hear you, but more endeared, pipe to the spirit ditties of no tone. Fair youth beneath the trees, thou canst not leave thy song, nor ever can those trees be bare. Bold lover, never, never canst thou kiss, though winning near the goal, yet do not grieve, she cannot fade. Though thou hast not thy bliss, forever wilt thou love, and she be fair. Wow. I mean, that's an extraordinary conceit, isn't it? Well, we all know it fades. We all know love gives out. We all know we're all going to die. No, actually, no. This urn tells a completely different story. It brings us back to Walter Pater, the silence. What he says is almost better. What he doesn't say is almost better than what he says. So this is Debussy's Grecian urn. I've changed continents a little bit. Where is it? There. This is a prelude called Canope. A canope was a little sculpture from ancient Egypt. It was quite tiny, standing about that high, and it was usually a figure, like a gargoyle really, and it was the sculpted lid to an urn of ashes, burial ashes, cremation, and the Egyptians used to put it in the tombs of the dead. And Debussy had two of these little canopic lids. He found them in an antique shop in Paris, and he had them on his shelf, and he looked at them, and he turned them, that deadness, like the Grecian urn, he turned it into something profoundly living. And I think this piece borders silence, and I do think this piece was exactly what Robert Godet was alluding to when he said that Debussy and Keats were very similar. Heard melodies are sweet, but those unheard are sweeter. And at the end I will demonstrate how we hear unheard melodies. This evokes ancient instruments, non-Western instruments, flutes, zithers, bells, and this could not be more removed from the arabesque. This has no two-bar phrases anywhere near it. At the end, we have this and we hear it several times, so we know that that final note is there. But he doesn't play it at the very end. It goes so quiet that we are asked to imagine that final D. So we have it here. On some pianos, you can actually hear that note ringing on a big, big Steinway concert grand, because it's the top note of the chord that you've just played. So it should ring. It's just there. But it doesn't matter if you hear it or not, because you will imagine it. I trust you will imagine it. Now, it's not beyond my brief, really, because to turn to Ravel, because for a short time, Keats doesn't really come into it, but for a short time, he and Debussy were treading very similar ground in what they were exploring in their music. Debussy, we all know, is called an impressionist. Ravel is usually also, for some of his music, called an impressionist, but he was quite considerably younger than Debussy, so he sort of missed all the hullabaloo of impressionism when it hit the world in 1874, the first Impressionist exhibition, and Debussy was born in 1862, so Debussy was 12 years old. So Debussy's formative period in his teens, the Impressionists were causing all their notoriety. Whereas Ravel was some 14 years younger, so he wasn't born until the middle of the 1870s. So in his formative years in the 1890s, Impressionism had passed, really. And we get into post-Impressionism on Paul Gauguin, who memorably said, all colour is vibration, just as music is. So we have this wonderful clashing of painting and music and poetry. And Stéphane Mallarmé, the great French symbolist poet, talked endlessly about arabesques. So we've heard an arabesque, have we not? But Debussy was a very, very young man when he wrote that, and so he hadn't quite fully grasped what the mystical Mallarmé was talking about when he talked about arabesques. But the arabesque within poetry for Mallarmé was a sort of an unspoken sound of words, rather like the music of Keats, unspoken sound of words that made its way through the whole structure of the poem. And it conveyed meaning irrespective of the meaning of the word. So this is profoundly all art aspires to the condition of music. Now, Ravel was very much influenced by that period, which is usually what we call symbolism. And at the beginning of the century, he and Debussy were on quite good terms. And one day, Ravel's closest friend, childhood friend, age of 12, they were boys together, both. Ravel's mother was Spanish, and this boy was a Spaniard, and he didn't speak any French. And they went to school together, and he gradually learnt French, and he turned out to be one of the great concert pianists of the beginning of the 20th century, Ricardo Viñes. And one day, Viñes was at Debussy's house, and Debussy was talking about his great symphony, La Mer, the sea. And he said that he dreamed of a kind of music that would sound so free, a form that would be so free as to sound improvised. So he was working on a freedom of expression and a freedom of structure. And Viñes was very excited by this, went straight back to Ravel and said, "Tell you what, Debussy has been telling me about this." And Ravel, being Ravel, he was rather correct and said, "Well, that's exactly what I'm doing too." So there was one point at which they were on the same ground. And at this period, Debussy was writing a collection of piano pieces called Images, Pictures. Wonderful one called Reflections in the Water. And so on, and writing a wonderful one later called Bells Heard Through the Leaves. And so on. And at that time,
You might have to start thinking about
yeah, I thought I'd looked. Got 10 minutes?
10 minutes.
Yeah. About that, at exactly that time, Ravel was writing a set of pieces called Mirrors, Miroir, Reflections, answering Debussy's Image. Which brings us to this piece called Oiseau Triste. And one of the pictures was called Sad Birds. And here is a nightingale recorded in my village in East Sussex in the south of England in 2023 or 24. This dear soul hasn't quite warmed up. When you hear about pealing of nightingale song in the south of France or southwest France, there are about 12 nightingales in one hedge, so it's permanent. But when you only have one nightingale, like we do in Robertsbridge, there's only one nightingale. There's a lot of gaps. Remember that one. It's that long, uninterrupted, repeated note that is so fascinating about the nightingale. Well, one of the fascinating things about the nightingale's song. Here we go. Unfortunately, that's all I have time to play you, but it's that keening note. Everybody thinks that the beginning of Ravel's Oiseau Triste is a bell, but it ain't a bell, it's a nightingale, keening on one note. Well, I haven't got it on there, so I have to play it from memory. Yeah, I don't think it's Keats' nightingale, but it is a pretty wonderful nightingale. So thank you very much. Thank you. Well, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. That was absolutely wonderful performance and a tour de force. And I think we'll all be reading Keats and listening to Debussy in a completely different way now.
There's a book. There's a book in it. There might be a book in it, but I'll probably be slated because it won't be very. It's all very speculative. But yeah, good. Thank you very much, Ella. Thank you.
I think the best thing to do now there's a glass of Prosecco if the weather holds out for us, waiting for us downstairs, and perhaps we can have conversation, comments, reflections with Paul then. That might be. But okay, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. And